Afternoon, everybody. So I want to take this time to talk a little bit about freedom and coercion and why forcing people to do stuff or coercing them and not respecting their personal choices is bad, undesirable, or rather let's just call it tyrannical, because that's essentially what it is. So let's firstly get one thing straight off the bat. People don't live their lives, their normal day-to-day lives, or even plan their futures based on what scientific studies and papers say. Scientific studies and papers come a dime a dozen, and they cannot prove anything at all. The best they can do is investigate some sort of causal direction of correlation or relationship between factors, variables, whatever you want to call it. That's why I call it hypothesis testing. So anytime anyone, be it a journalist or a friend or a family member or anyone else, says, but the science proves, you can stop them right there and tell them they're talking absolute bullshit. Science proves nothing. At best, what science does, or what a study does, is it rejects or chooses not to reject a null hypothesis in comparison to the alternative hypothesis. An example of this would be with the null hypothesis being of a study on the effects of alcohol on driving ability, null hypothesis being that consuming large amounts of alcohol has no effect on your driving ability, and the alternative hypothesis being consuming large amounts of alcohol has an adverse effect on your driving ability to the point where it becomes dangerous. The study will never go, oh well, we've now generated our sample of or our data sample or a data set, and we have now analyzed it or modeled it or whatever we've done, investigated the data. The study proves that drinking large amounts of alcohol is bad for your driving. It doesn't work that way. The study will in fact conclude, if that's the case, is it would reject the null hypothesis in favor of the alternative and conclude that there is strong evidence indicating that excessive consumption of alcohol or consuming large amounts of alcohol is bad for your ability to safely operate a motor vehicle, right? So no proof, just evidence indicates X, Y, Z. This brings us to the thing with the whole mandating people's personal choices for the public good. Let's say there was a study or a series of studies that put forth that evidence indicates that if every adult citizen in the country were given a gun and forced to carry it, as well as forced to train with it and become defensively proficient, that violent crime rates would come down significantly. And then we can extrapolate from that conclusion that, let's say, we model something that shows violent crime rates comes down by a large amount, and that we hypothesize that X amount of thousands of lives will be saved annually by trained people carrying guns in the public space as a direct result of bringing that violent crime down. And then we say, cool, people who carry guns and are trained to carry them will be allowed out in public, whereas those who don't carry guns and aren't defensively trained won't be out in public, because their inability to stop criminals when they encounter them is detrimental to their overall public safety, because they're just going to generate more victims and, how shall we put this appropriately, they're going to spread the disease of victimhood. Therefore, it's in the public benefit for them to carry a gun and be trained, otherwise they're not allowed outside. I would oppose that, as obviously a defensively trained gun owner who spends the majority of my life now training people to do the stuff and doing it myself. Equally, I ask for the gun owners who are so in everyone's face about vaccine mandates and blah, 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 blah. If any study came out tomorrow that claims that there's strong evidence indicating that you are much more unsafe with the gun in your house than you are without having it, as many false, wrong, cherry-picked studies have previously claimed, would you alter your behavior and say, cool, I'm going to surrender my guns tomorrow because the science has spoken? Or are you going to say this is a fat load of bullshit and carry on living your life based on your value system? Let's skip past all this nonsense, this esoteric bullshit. Your rights, your freedoms are not a product of science. They're not a product of scientific studies. They're not a product of what researchers say they are. They're not determined in a laboratory. They're not determined by research. They're not determined by sampling or modeling. Your rights and your freedoms are your natural rights and freedoms, and they come from a deeply held old philosophical background, and pardon the dog, who's now just deciding to ruin my little video here. Your rights and freedoms don't come from science. Your rights and freedoms are your rights and freedoms. There's a deep rationality behind it, going past the fad of hypothesis testing and all this other nonsense. Infringing on the right of bodily integrity of millions of people because you feel compelled they should consume a pharmaceutical product is irrational. Living your life according to scientific papers is equally irrational, because then you would never leave the house because it's so dangerous out there. But subsequently, you'd also recognize that most people die in their own homes, or that the home is one of the most dangerous places for you to be. So would you then stay locked in your house, or are you going to do a risk assessment every single day you get up with an Excel spreadsheet to decide whether or not you're going to leave the house or stay inside? That's frankly not how it works. Human decision making is based on heuristics. Heuristics are strongly based on our internal value systems, and our internal value systems are subsequently a product of our beliefs, our life experience, and a whole bunch of other factors. And not all of them science. In fact, I doubt any of them science, or our belief in what so-called science tells us. So there's a bit of a rant, but I hope it gets some juices flowing and makes people think about differently, especially when those people, gun owners, think that we should restrict the rights of others based on a scientific fad or on some research papers and conclusions. Research papers, research conclusions come a dime a dozen. They change every couple of weeks, every couple of months, every couple of years. Rights, values, freedoms are forever. Let's keep it that way.